Okay, you guys said that you found the video explaining the Harpy Queen fight to be interesting and useful, so I figured, what the hell? Why not do something for part of the game design that I've done for probably the next game? We'll see what happens. Which is that there's a whole lot of discussion and debate really about the residuum, both in terms of what to do with the actual item and also the mechanic itself. For anybody listening who isn't part of the game, in the game that I run, there is a substance called residuum, which serves a pretty similar function to the item of the same name that is in the wild mount setting. And residuum is basically a form of magical powder that is used to create magical items. In the wild mount setting, it's also used as a replacement regent if you have to cast a spell that has a material component that costs money. We haven't really explored that design space yet, so we'll talk about that when we get to it, if it becomes relevant. So anyway, the players have got some residuum. They have a certain amount of residuum. It is a very rare substance. Most people don't know what it does. The secret of residuum was hidden for the last 1,000 years and is only now coming to light to various different groups of people. And so the possession of residuum and its use is becoming a politically charged topic, basically, in the game world. Because controlling residuum gives you a large amount of control over magic item trade and things like warfare. Because if you've got a large amount of residuum, you can equip your army to be able to fight more effectively. So the players have got some residuum. They need to figure out what to do with it. The effectiveness of residuum when it comes to creating enchanted items is dependent on the blacksmith creating the item that you want to enchant, or the tailor if it's a cloak or something, and also on the enchanter, the spellcaster who actually physically enchants the item to have a magical effect. And one of the opportunities that the players have got in the upcoming game is that they've developed a relationship with a reclusive couple who live who guard a shrine in the mountains, and one of them is a fairly high level spellcaster. So Tycha is a blind Gorgon oracle. She is basically a fairly high level cleric. She has the capability to cast 6th level spells. Don't read too much into that in terms of what she can and can't do by looking at the cleric spell list. She is an extremely focused divination specialist as an oracle, so she's not going to cast contagion, for example, even though it's on the cleric spell list. Not important. The important thing is, as the players almost conclude this particular mini arc of the game, their relationship with this couple has grown to the point where Tycha would be willing to spend a reasonable amount of time enchanting items for the players using up their residuum stores. Because Tycha is higher level than the characters are, she is able to create things that the players that are kind of out of the player's grasp, but also do it with a reduced residuum cost, effectively, because she's a more efficient enchanter, because of how effective she is as a spellcaster. And so I've come up with a short list of items that the players can opt for Tycha to create for them. And the players can choose to invest the time and the residuum necessary in order to create these, or they can ask Tycha to create any other magic item that was on the original list that I sent them, which we're not going to go through now. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the design process on creating these magic items and sort of the balancing factors involved in order to make them viable options to introduce into the game and have them be attractive to the players without being overpowered. Okay. So the first thing when it came to designing these magic items was making sure that they were on theme with either Tycha or her husband Jericho, who is a exiled angel. Yeah, complicated. And so all of the items are themed around those two characters. The other thing is I wanted to make sure that the items filled particular niches that the players had expressed they were interested in. So currently only half the party have magic weapons, for example. And so I knew magic weapons was a big focus for them and something that they would be very interested in. And I'll talk about, I mean, there are 5 items on the list. I'll talk about all of them individually and the creation process for each of them. So why not just go through them one at a time now? So the first one on the list is Shield of Reckless Love. This is an item that I created based on the fact that Tycha, who is immortal, and Jericho, who is an immortal, how would an immortal and an immortal have a relationship? Because obviously you expect that one of them would pass away and the other one would go on living, and that would suck. The part of their relationship is that when they got married, the god of love allowed Tycha to basically extended her lifespan so that she doesn't age as long as Tycha still loves her, as long as Jericho still loves her. So she basically shares his immortality, effectively. And Jericho is her protector. He will do anything to protect her. And Tycha, who is a oracle, foresees Jericho's death anytime he is going to do anything that would get himself killed, which is fairly regularly. And so the two of them, because they love one another, keep each other alive. So the Shield of Reckless Love was an item I wanted to create in order to capture that idea. And Mihai, who is a paladin with the protection fighting style, fights with a shield and a sword. One of the things that Isaac, who plays Mihai, has expressed for a long time is that and I agree with him, the protection fighting style is completely underpowered compared with other options in terms of how useful it is. A large majority of the D&D community agree with that sentiment. And so we've tossed back and forward a couple of ideas about how do we make the protection fighting style actually work, basically. And we homebrewed a rule that the protection fighting style works within 10 feet rather than 5 feet, which helped to a certain extent. But even then, the actual effect of the protection fighting style is not significant enough to matter a lot of the time. So I tied together that thematic idea of this eternal love between Tycha and Jericho and this idea of a form of protecting other people, and turned it into a shield where the bearer of the shield is able to use their reaction to basically take an attack that targets somebody within 10 feet, and also allows them to move next to that person so that they can protect them as part of the reaction. Now, because there is quite a lot of tension in the design space there between using your reaction to do that and having the protection fighting style, basically this would make the protection fighting style completely obsolete. I added an additional rider on the end here that says that if you have the protection fighting style, or alternatively the interception or sentinel, interception fighting style or the sentinel feat, then you have resistance to the damage of the attack if it hits you. And the main reason here is so that you can still have the protection fighting style or the interception fighting style and still have them do something, so that it isn't wasted, or so that you're not almost getting pushed onto another fighting style that doesn't necessarily suit your character theme. So I felt like this was a reasonable addition to the item on top of what it does normally. This is an optional thing that the item can be created to do. In my sort of magic item crafting process, items that you can create have a power level, and that corresponds to how much residuum and time it costs in order to create. And my players know vaguely how to interpret this, but what I've done is I've deliberately written this in white text so that it doesn't show up originally, because then it's much easier to read the magic item. And there is a bit of additional information here that's grayed out so that the players don't have to look at it unless they absolutely want to. That tells them sort of how powerful is this item for the sake of comparison with other items, how long would it take to make, how long would it take to enchant, how much residuum is it going to cost them, that kind of thing. And the variance here between sort of 15 and 17 ounces is based on whether or not you also pick up this additional rider here, because if you decide, I don't really care about that, either because you want to drop the protection fighting style or for whatever reason you want to save a little bit of residuum, then the option of not taking that is also there. I feel like that's a pretty solid magic item in terms of balance. It's pretty well balanced. It fits the theme of what certain characters are trying to do. You'll also notice it doesn't require attunement, which is a deliberate decision on my part, because I wanted it to be an item that could be swapped around to other people, because multiple members of the party can use shields, and so to have the additional option of making tactical decisions like maybe Mihai isn't here for some reason, or for a roleplay reason, he wants to give another character the ability to protect somebody that they care about, then he can opt to give them the shield, or if Mihai gets knocked unconscious, somebody else can pick the shield up and protect him. All of those fun ideas that can make a game really interesting. So I made sure it didn't have an attunement. Attunement is often used for items that have sort of spells attached to them, or have activated bonuses, because the attunement process is how you learn to activate the property of the item. This shield doesn't have an activation as much as it's just allowing you to use an additional action, a different type of action in combat. Let's take a look at the second item, Seer's Third Eye. So this is an amulet that grants its user the ability to cast some basic divination spells. Thematically makes perfect sense. Tycha herself is a blind oracle, and so the idea that she has this additional sight that is not physically her eyes is a big part of that character, and this made a lot of sense. One of the problems that my particular group has is they're very heavily skewed towards hand-to-hand combat. So there's a lot of hacking and slashing with swords, and they have limited options when it comes to magic and spells. And that means they're stretched a little bit thin when it comes to the exploration pillar of the game, which means their ability to find information. And so giving them additional options with these extra divination spells will allow them to explore the game a little bit more, understand exactly what's happening, and get more information so they can make decisions. So I thought that would be helpful. And it has an additional property, which again is an optional thing that they can add on top of it for an extra cost, which is based on the wizard portent ability that divination specialist wizards have. So when you finish a long rest, roll a d20, record the number, and later that day you can replace any d20 roll made by you or a creature you can see with the number that you rolled at the start of the day. And you have to do it before the dice is initially rolled. So this can sometimes sound a little bit weird to some players, but the way that this plays out is you begin the day, you roll a d20. Let's say you roll a 2. Okay, so you've got a 2 that is banked for later use. What you can then go on to do is, if you or someone in your party is a spellcaster who has a particularly powerful ability, but it's sort of a save or die ability, like Whole Person. Okay, so you choose a creature, they have to make a wisdom saving throw. If they fail, they get paralyzed. But if they succeed, nothing happens, and then you waste a spell. You can force that creature to fail. So you can plan ahead and go, I know that the creature is going to fail its save against my Whole Person, so now we can strategize around the idea that we're going to have Whole Person. And in terms of the theme of this item, and indeed the portent ability that the divination wizard has, is you foresee that somebody is going to fail their saving throw, or someone is going to succeed on a particularly critical attack roll, that kind of thing, and you can plan around that idea, right? Because you've now got that, foreknowledge as a result of this sort of portent that you witness at the beginning of the day. So pretty cool ability, very powerful, and consequently this item is these items are arranged in ascending power order, so most of these items are fairly powerful. So this is a good one. It requires an attunement slot. The item needs to have a bond with the person who's using it in order to give them that knowledge at the beginning of the day, so the attunement makes sense in terms of roleplay as well as in terms of balance. The third item on here is addressing the fact that the players wanted to pick up some magical weapons, and so along the theme of divination, how do you have a weapon that is related to the idea of divination? And so we have the blade or the bow of revelation. Okay, and so this can be applied to any weapon that can deal piercing damage, which is pretty much any sword, dagger, or bow. Technically, crossbow as well. And you can get a little bit fancy if you really wanted to with a war pick, whatever you like. First and foremost, the kind of the basic weapon rider here of giving +1 to attack and damage. This is actually a very powerful effect, and I think putting this on any weapon actually bumps the power level up quite significantly, more than players realize. How much damage this actually represents over the course of a day. I would say about 60 to 70% of this item's power level is actually just sunk into that one line. But I don't think that many players are aware of how big an effect that actually is. And then the bow has a second effect, which is kind of sort of utility with a little bit of additional damage. If you hit a creature with it, you can force them to make a charisma save. On a fail, you learn its defensive patterns. Okay, in terms of roleplay, you learn its defensive patterns. It reveals something to you about its defensive patterns, which teaches you the creature's resistances and vulnerabilities and immunities. And your attacks also do an additional d6 of damage to the target. So it's a little bit like Hunter's Mark or Hex. And on top of that, you know the target's location until the effect ends. And while you have this knowledge, the creature can't become hidden from you, and it gains the benefit from invisibility. And the kind of the crucial thing on this is that you can only use it once per day, but it only counts if the creature fails its save. Okay, so the last line says once a creature has failed a save against this effect, the effect can't be used again until the following dawn. So you can keep using it until the creature fails. Okay, it just will require you to continue to hit the target until they eventually fail the saving throw. So if you really want to have this effect on a creature, you can guarantee that it will eventually happen just by continuing to attack them. One of the main villains in the game is a wizard who uses greater invisibility. And the players are very aware of that, and they've been thinking for quite a while about how to counter that particular aspect. For a while, they did have access to see invisibility, but now they don't have that anymore. And I thought this was an interesting option for them to explore to regain that capability while remaining on theme. Again, this does require attunement because the item has an activation, and you have to have a bond with the item in order to know how to activate that particular aspect of it. So the attunement there is for that purpose. This is a pretty powerful item, mostly because of this particular line. If it didn't have that, it would be a lot less powerful. And so the amount of residuum it takes to make this is in accordance with that. And then there's a second magic item down here for a weapon option, except this is a little bit more niche. So this requires a pair of light weapons. Okay, so it could be 2 short swords, it could be 2 hand axes, it could be 2 sickles or 2 daggers. Okay, and they do have to be identical. They have to be the same type. First line here says that the pair of weapons count as a single item for the purposes of attunement. So you have to attune to both at the same time. While attuned to these weapons, you have a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls made with them. So this is written very specifically so that you can't create 2 short swords and then have 2 different people wield them and both have a +1 short sword. They have to both be wielded by the same person in order to get the benefit. And then the final part is, while wielding both weapons, you can use a bonus action to gain a fly speed equal to your walking speed, which lasts until the end of your turn. So if you are not on the ground at the end of your turn, you fall. You regain the use of this ability when your feet touch the ground. So this idea is that you can't fly, you can kind of super jump and then glide. Okay, so it's a little bit like certain characters in Super Smash Bros. Okay, or Demon Hunter in World of Warcraft. You can jump really high and then you can glide, or you can use it to get across gaps. The theme for this item is the idea of Jericho being an exiled angel, and when he was exiled, his wings were broken, and so he turned them into his weapons. He wields 2 chain sickles. I think the proper name for them is something like Kamegari-sama or Kugari-sama, something like that. It's a Japanese weapon. So when he was exiled, his wings, which were actually made of metal, he basically had them smelted down and remade into these weapons, so that and they give him some taste of that former life where he was actually able to fly. He can do it sort of in minor bursts. And so giving the players the option of creating a similar item based around the same theme was something that I thought was interesting and would present some additional options. 3 of the players, there are 6 players in the pie, 3 of them use dual wielding on a fairly regular basis. One of them actually has the dual wielder fighting style. 2 of them are rogues, and so they occasionally use their offhands to try and up their chances of getting sneak attack damage. The sort of the tension with this item is that you have to use your bonus action to gain the ability to fly. and so you can't then use your bonus action to use dual wielding. So there is a little bit of a balancing factor there. So you can use these as your 2 weapons for dual wielding, and then you get the benefit of having +1 to attack and damage even when you're attacking with your offhand. So you can do main hand attack, extra attack feature, and then bonus action offhands for 3 total attacks. If you're a ranger, if you're a rogue, you only get main hand offhand. But you're still getting the +1 to attack and damage on both of those. Or you can give up your bonus action attack in order to gain the fly speed for the 10. So there's an actual decision there, right? It's not just a no-brainer. And giving the players decisions that are meaningful is obviously a big part of D&D. These require attunement mostly in order to reinforce the fact that you have to be wielding both of them in order to apply the +1 attack and damage rolls. It was very important that this was not just effectively a cheap hack to create 2 short swords that gave +1 to attack and damage, because I knew that would be something that crossed my players' minds. The other thing, obviously, is that this item has an activate ability, and so it has to have an attunement process in order for the player's character to understand how to activate the item. There has to be a bond between the player and the item. Sorry, the player character and the item. And again, this is more powerful item, has a higher power rating in the power rating system that I use, and consequently it has a higher cost in order to create. Obviously, if you've got your own crafting system or you just want to sell these items from your magic item vendor, then that does not matter. I do obviously include the rough item cost. This is balanced within the economy of my own game, so you can up and down these costs. If you want to put these in your own game yourself, you can change these according to how much magic items cost in your world. My players at the moment are pretty rich because they killed a very rich man, basically. The final item on here is... let's try and get this on the page properly. There we go. The final item on here is one that I've put in front of them before as an option. The big difference, and they were interested in it, but the problem was it was kind of too expensive for them. It was going to use up too much of their resources. The benefit of having Tycha craft things is that she can create them at a reduced rate. So I thought, I'll put this item in front of them again because I knew they wanted it before, except now it costs less, and I can put a sort of an additional minor effect on that's related to the fact that it's this NPC friend of theirs who's creating it. So this is a translocation cube. The normal version of the translocation cube is sort of these first 3 paragraphs. So there's a little bit of note about the construction of the cube, which is basically just a description of this picture. And the cube allows a small number of creatures, in this case 12, because the cube has 12 edges. It allows 12 creatures, or up to 12 creatures. It's basically between 6 and 12. It requires 6 to activate, but you can do up to 12 people. When those people each hold the edges, it teleports all of the people holding it to a predetermined location within 12 miles. And you choose the locations, or you predetermine the locations by burying the cube underground for an hour, and then it attunes to the location that it's in. And that one of the faces of the cube takes on the appearance of that place that you've attuned it to, which is why it's up to 6 possible different predetermined locations, because it has 6 faces. Obviously, if you've already attuned 6 locations and you add a new one, then it replaces the face that is on the top side when it's underneath the ground. That's pretty much the entire idea behind the translocation cube. It basically allows fast travel, but only within a limited radius around where the players currently are, which cuts down on players repeating routes that they've traveled before, lets them save time, all that good stuff, without being able to just randomly cheat their way across the world, right? They can only go to a place they've been before. It has to be nearby. So it's very useful. The numbers here are simply based on the properties of a cube. So the number of places it can store is the number of faces. The number of people that can travel together is based on the number of edges. But all of the edges have to be held by somebody in order for the cube to activate. So obviously most people only have 2 hands, so they can only hold 2 edges. That means that because it has 12 edges, you need at least 6 people in order to make it work. And the number of miles was simply just linked to the number of edges again, simply because consistency. So there were other versions of this item, like a translocation tetrahedron, which is effectively a D4, right? So it's a triangle-based pyramid, where the limit on that is up to 6 people only 4 predetermined locations and only within 6 miles. And they wanted the option to take other people with them that weren't player characters. They wanted to be able to take NPCs with them. So that's why they wanted the cube rather than the tetrahedron. The final rider here is related to this item being created by Tycha, the NPC, the Oracle, and it links it to their particular location. So if the cube is attuned to the Shrine of Epiphany, which is where they live, then it can be used to go there once per day for free without it using up the fact that this item can only be used once per day. And what that allows them to do is, if they are at their home base, which is within 12 miles of the shrine, then they can travel to the shrine to have a conversation with Tycha and Jericho, and then they can use the cubes 1 use per day to go back home or to go to the city or somewhere else. So just it encourages the players to have a relationship with those 2 people, basically. And it's sort of an opt-in to furthering that relationship, which my game operates in quite a moral grey area. The people in charge of running the society are not really good people. And so, unlike a lot of D&D campaigns where you tend to have, hey, society is really good and all the monsters live in the wilderness and go into the dungeon to fight the monsters, which is totally fine and a really fun way of playing a game. In my game, a lot of at least half of the threats that the party face are other people who don't like them. And so to have this couple appear in the game who are completely morally upright, I think was quite a refreshing addition to the game, because it meant suddenly there were at least 2 people in the world where the players didn't have to think, do we really trust these people? Are these people actually trying to help us, or are they trying to get something for themselves? And so giving the players the option of developing that relationship and maintaining it, even though Tycha and Jericho live in a very remote place, giving them the option to do that was quite important. So that was part of the creation process for this. This is the most expensive item on the list. But having Tycha enchant it actually reduces the residuum cost down to about 40% of what it would be if they tried to enchant the item themselves. So it's a huge opportunity for them in terms of economy and making the most of their resources. So I imagine they'll probably jump at the chance, which will also involve investing a couple of days worth of time into the creation of these items, because while Tycha can do the enchanting process by herself, the actual blacksmithing part of it needs to be done by Toasty, who is a member of the party, one of the player characters. So the players will have to invest probably a couple of days if they want to make multiple items into staying at the shrine, which can also allow some other elements of the plot to move forward. So yeah, a little bit of insight into the creation process and some of the magic items and how these things are, how I try to keep them balanced, basically. Balanced and simple to the point where players aren't scratching their heads going, how does this work? Or just forgetting that they even have the magic item at all because it's too niche to ever come up, which has been a problem in the past. There are quite a few magic items that have been introduced that players have forgotten about because they don't see enough use in order to be something that they go to as an option. So there are plenty of examples of that, like the Blackstone Tortoise, and I think Huggy probably sees about as much use as he possibly can, given that you can only use him once a week. But yeah, there we go. Let me know what you think. I know most people watching this are probably people that know me. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Yeah.